My guest today is Lee Hawkins, a journalist who is the author of the new best-selling book, I'm Nobody's Slave: How Uncovering My Family's History Set Me Free. He is a 2023 Pulitzer Prize finalist who spent 19 years at the Wall Street Journal before leaving in 2022 to launch the What Happened in Alabama series with American Public Media. Lee, how are you?
Chuck, how you doing, buddy?
The
Good to
first
see you
thing,
today.
could you please distinguish what a Pulitzer Prize finalist is between a Pulitzer Prize who was just nominated?
Yeah, so the Pulitzer is an award that allows for a winner and two finalists. And basically, the finalists are the people who are, second in line, basically. And so it comes down to that one decision of the judges. And so they usually the winner, and then they say, here are the two other people who were also giving finalist accolades to. And so that's what it is. And in my case, in our case, with my Wall Street Journal team who wrote about the Tulsa Massacre, we were finalists for in the explanatory journal, the explanatory journalism category, and it was about 1921.
You grew up in St. Paul, correct? St. Paul, Minnesota. Ask the same question. Okay. You grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, correct?
We're good on our end, and then we can. Yeah, we actually just lost connection with him. Certainly, he'll try to jump back in. But Chuck, let's do this while we're waiting for him to jump back in. Let's you and I dialogue a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought about this show, if you will.
Well, as a child, I was also always passionate about sports. And apparently, my dad was also passionate about sports. Um, when I stopped playing sports, I became passionate about following sports. So everybody that knows me, I quote stats all the time and make arguments for my opinion on the show, my opinion on a different topic. Um,
Looks like we've got Lee back. So if you want to continue, we can jump back into our dialogue a little later.
okay, thank you. You grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, Lee, correct?
Yes.
What are your fondest memories growing up?
I think just being in a very strong community, a strong village in the historic Rondo community where my church was, uh, Mount Olivet Baptist Church, and just a thriving Black community that produced people or was home to people like August Wilson and Gordon Parks and NAACP Executive Director Roy Wilkins. That inspired me tremendously, knowing about those people and knowing, for instance, that the journalist Carl T. Rowan actually rented from my grandparents when he was in college at the University of Minnesota. He rented from my great grandparents. And my great grandmother was really, really intent on helping me understand that I could be a journalist, that journalism was one of the things that I could do with my life. And so there wasn't a time in my consciousness as a little boy that I wasn't thinking that in the back of my head that one day I would become a journalist. So yeah, it was just a strong community. I was raised heavily by my father, my great grandfather, and my grandfather. Strong male Black influence, and I have a lot of fond memories of it.
You attended University of Wisconsin-Madison, correct?
Yes, and I was the Badger Herald editorial page editor, if you
I do
remember that.
remember. Why Wisconsin as opposed to other universities?
Yeah. Reciprocity. Minnesota and Wisconsin have a agreement. They have an agreement that Minnesota students pay slightly more than an in-state resident at Wisconsin. And, at the time, which we'll get into in the book, I had just gone through a lot of positive things in my life, but I also had a lot of trauma in my life. And one of the things that was important to me that I never really wanted to have to depend on anybody. And so I felt that going to a school where the tuition was affordable would be good for me because I ended up doing a lot for myself. Then I worked 3 jobs. I worked at a bank. I worked for the student government, and I also worked at the um, I worked at the student newspaper. And so, it was a good opportunity. There were a lot of people who were from Minnesota there as well. So I went there knowing a lot of people. Good school, wanted to do as much as I could in the journalism field, and I did. So that was great.
After leaving university,
And that led to me working at the Wisconsin State Journal and also working for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel for 7 years, where I covered the world of business. And then I was recruited by the Wall Street Journal in 2003 to go to Detroit to cover General Motors. And that opened up a whole new world for me. And I was in Detroit for 3 years, and then I went to New York. And that
briefly describe some of the highlights working at the Wall Street Journal during your illustrious 19-year career.
I'm sorry, you
No,
asked what I
briefly
did when I
describe
was
some
at
of
the
the
Wall Street Journal.
highlights working at the Wall Street Journal during your.
Oh yeah, there were a lot of highlights. There were a lot of highlights. Covering General Motors was a big one, but I did a lot bigger things as well. I had the opportunity to do a lot of on-camera work. I interviewed every major news, so many major newsmakers, from co-creating a series called The Business of Celebrity with Lee Hawkins. And so that enabled me to interview everybody from Martha Stewart to Robert De Niro to 50 Cent to, you name it, the biggest names in sports. You talk about sports. So, Shaquille O'Neal and Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. And a lot of that was the business behind sports, the branding aspects. And, I, for a long time, have believed in, my other project, the New Black Overclass, which I did on CNBC, was a project that really focused on what I'm seeing, what years ahead of what's happening now, the New Black Overclass, which was, a class of young people who become very wealthy very fast in the sports, media, and entertainment communities, and what that opportunity creates then for them to then expand and diversify and create wealth for generations going forward. And so that was a big one. I also, towards the end, covered education, the New York Public Schools for 2 years, which was in preparation for my book, I Am Nobody's Slave, How Uncovering My Family's History Set Me Free, which I had worked on for about the last 8 years at the Wall Street Journal simultaneously. And that book really deals with the legacy of enslavement, Jim Crow, and integration, and the impact on my family, but also through the prism of my family, showing a lot of foundational Black American families and their experience. And inherent in that was both triumph and trauma. I think that every generation of Black throughout slavery, the 12 generations who went through slavery and the 5 who went through Jim Crow apartheid, which was a system of apartheid, not segregation, experienced childhood trauma. And so I think my work around was very important because I wanted to know how the Black community heals from the fact that for most of America's history, all but 60 years of America's history, Black people have not had full constitutional rights. Being part of that first generation to have um, full constitutional rights to me means I'm a first generation American, even though my family's been in America since the 1600s, and I'm a descendant of Revolutionary War soldiers, and I was even born on an Air Force base where my dad enlisted in the Air Force at the height of the Vietnam era, even though he wasn't born equal to a white person on paper under the Constitution. He still served his country. And so there's a lot of work in the book around that tension between an integration generation father who lived through Alabama Jim Crow segregation and his fears for me and my sisters and best to achieve the American dream. And just like Fences, this book gets into some of those cross-generational themes.
Are the issues that you discuss in your book still relevant today, and why?
Yeah, so everything is still relevant today. When you look at the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, we have to realize that Jim Crow was a system of apartheid in which, yes, there was segregation, but also thousands upon thousands of people were murdered as a part of that. And my grandfather was murdered. Both of my great grandfathers were murdered. And primarily, I've had murders in my family every generation from at least 1837 all the way to modern times. And most of the time, especially early on in the South, the murders were over two things: land and livestock. And, it was a real kind of symptom of the fact that my family was very entrepreneurial and ambitious. And so, established businesses, there were many times where people were killed for that. And so, it matters now in modern times in many ways. One thing I did for this book was I took extensive DNA tests, and I was able to find out that though I thought most of my lineage was from West Africa, I also have about 18% DNA from United Kingdom. And I contacted the white people who I'm related to and found out that it's through slavery and the sexual assault of our matriarchs that I'm related to them. And in modern times, if you want to say, what's relevant today, well, first of all, the blood going through my veins today, I'm an amalgamation. I identify as Black American, which is a political identity but the Black American is an amalgamation of Black and European because of colonization, and that has had a lot of impact on our identity. There's been a lot of internalized self-hatred to go along with the power of our people that we're still navigating through. So there's that, and there's also my last name is in modern times. My last name is Hawkins, which is a British name that comes from Sir John Hawkins, who was a slave trafficker who trafficked so many enslaved people for Queen Elizabeth that she knighted him. He made her so rich that she made him a knight. And the effects of colonization still ripple through. And I think the biggest thing about this book is that it goes into the violent. I traced my family history going back 400 years, which is how I discovered these murders. And a lot of these murders were due to the violent origins of our country. We can be very proud of our country, but we also have to lean into the part of our country that goes back to all of the dueling that happened, and the people who were killed in duels, and the people who were killed because of colonizers' genocide against the indigenous people, and all of the whipping that happened, all of the flogging that happened during slavery to push people to pick more cotton. And there were all kinds of things in the American origin story that were very violent and are very violent. And so, when I trace this, I'm able to show that a lot of the violence that we see in modern times, for instance, the violence against children in school, corporal punishment is still legal. I'm in South Carolina right now where they are still able to beat kids in schools. And it's mainly the slavery states, and also the violence against children in homes. My book gets into the legacy of corporal punishment and the fact that because Black Americans fear so devoutly for their children, a lot of times those who came from Jim Crow, like my father, used the belt, and the belt was a big part of my childhood. And I was very curious to know where it happened, where it came from, because there were so many things that I was told were representative of who we are as a people. But I learned through this study and going into the archives that all of this traced back to a plantation of a man named Jesse Pugh, who enslaved my great great grandmother Charity Pugh, whom my family knew because she used to babysit my grandmother. For 30 years. For the first 30 years of her life, she was in bondage. And for the last 60 years, she lived under Jim Crow apartheid. And so she was the last generation of my family to be enslaved. And so, that was but a moment ago. If my grandmother knew her and my uncle, who we interviewed about her, knew her, then that shows that in modern times, our great great grandparents have a great deal of influence on. And this book was really about the way that slavery and Jim Crow apartheid had shaped the way that I was raised, because my father was born, and he was one of 8 million survivors of Jim Crow apartheid who are alive, many of them alive today. Or there were more than 8 million, but there are 8 million who are alive today, who have never been acknowledged as having lived through apartheid. And I think it's largely because in America we're still in very much denial about that, and that we love to define Jim Crow as segregation. But if segregation was just the worst of it, then we wouldn't have had the movement that we had for the rights that we needed to get for equal access to housing and all of the things that were the foundation for the fight that we continue to have in those areas. But we know that they were explicitly denied to Black Americans all the way up to 1964. And so it's only been 60 years that Black people have been equal to white people under the Constitution in this country. So racial equality is a very new concept in America that people are just getting used to. And my book is basically an undeniable, irrefutable story about a Black family that proves that, and the fact that despite that, we were still able to be successful, but we also carried a lot of wounds as a result of that. And so my book is meant to bring about a lot of intergenerational healing within the family and also within the country. And the first thing that I'm going after is violence against children in homes, violence in the community, and violence across our nation. I believe that we're going into a period of what I call violent social change, with the exaltation of Luigi Mangione for killing the United Healthcare CEO, and also with the recent killing of Charlie Kirk on the other side when the pendulum swung. And we're seeing the pendulum swing back and forth, and people believing that violence is the way to solve issues. And this book is a nonviolent social change book. And I'll actually, Chuck, be talking a lot about that in Milwaukee this week when I come on Monday to speak as part of a symposium about my book with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and the National Association of Black Journalists.
That's Monday.
Milwaukee
What date and time, Lee?
Yeah, it's Monday. I believe I want to make sure that I get that right. I think it starts at 5 o'clock at the Thrive On at Thrive On. And you actually need to sign up for the event. So if you just Google Lee Hawkins, uh, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel Evite, you'll be able to
I think it's
sign
from
up
5 to 7,
and
correct?
attend.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned education as a bridge to racial equality. Oh, I want to lead up to the nonprofit, so you can take the break. You can the United Negro College Fund. That's what I was leading up to. You're gonna do. You're gonna do. Don't you have something to do for the United Negro College Fund?
It's going to run in the commercial break.
I know, but I want to segue to it and then have you run it. It's gonna take me 2 minutes to do that.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, Lee, you mentioned in your book that education has been a bridge to racial equality. Is that correct? Okay,
Yes.
and you support a nonprofit foundation. What what nonprofit is that?
Yeah, the United Negro College Fund. I believe devoutly in education for Black Americans, particularly foundational Black Americans who are descendants of ancestors who lived through enslavement and Jim Crow. And I encourage everyone to contribute to the United Negro College Fund.
Okay, we're gonna take a break right now, Lee.
Take a break and we'll be right back.
And then I'm going to need to wrap up in about 3 minutes.
Lee, I'd like to thank you for being on the show. Good luck in the future, and I hope to see you Monday. Okay?
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you, Milwaukee. I love you. I love Milwaukee. And I'm so happy to have the opportunity to come back and see everybody and speak about my book, I Am Nobody's Slave, how uncovering my family's history set me
Thanks for
free.
tuning in to Tell It Like It Is with Chuck. Peace and blessings, Chuck.
All right, brother. Keep up the good work. Thanks a lot, Chuck. Sounds good.